Okay, so we are looking at chapter 18, Catholic Reformation and Wars of Religion. And we'll try to do this as quickly as possible because Tiffany Gooden says she falls asleep during these, and we don't want any of you to suffer that same fate. So, looking at your handout, the first thing we're going to talk about is that there's actually various types of Protestantism that develops during this time. On your handout, it says Protestantism, and it lists three different types. As it spread throughout Europe, it's going to look in a couple of different ways. First of all, there's Lutheranism, and we want to write down that it was most common in Germany and Scandinavia. Still to this day, if you go to Germany or Scandinavia, and if people do say they're Christian, they'll probably identify as one of those two. Oh, or if they say they're Christian in Germany or Scandinavia, if they say they're Christian, they'll probably say that they're Lutheran. And also we have Calvinism, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit later. But we're going to see Calvinism do well in Switzerland, France, the Netherlands, and part of Eastern Europe. Finally, we have Anglicanism, which is a form of Protestantism that we'll see mainly in England, but we'll also see it export to the United States. In fact, all of these will export to the United States in one form or fashion. First of all, let's talk a little bit about Calvinism. And so we have John Calvin, and he's real famous for, he's a reformer, you can write down, where it says John Calvin. And he's also famous for writing a particular book that I've put on the slide called The Institutes of the Christian Religion. And basically, this is a book that is going to talk about like all the basics of Christianity from a Reformation point of view. And because he is a reformer, because he believes in the Protestant Reformation, on your handout, he stressed the idea of grace alone. You might remember this is the idea that you don't go to heaven because of anything good you've done. Heaven, according to John Calvin, according to Luther, is a free gift. And if someone offers you a free gift, there's nothing you can do to earn it. All you have to do is to take it. And that's what Calvin said, that heaven, salvation, is by grace alone, it's free. But there's also a little acronym that points out other important beliefs that Calvinism has. And the acronym is TULIP. And we're going to take a look at it, and we're going to write a few things by each one. First of all, in TULIP, you have the T, which stands for total depravity. And we'll write down that that basically means that humans are fundamentally sinners. That fundamentally we as humans are sinners. We are depraved. And, if we are fundamentally depraved, you don't want anything to do with God by nature. By nature, you want to live your own life. By nature, you want to be your own God. By nature, you want to do what you want to do. Total depravity. He says that's true of humanity. The U is unconditional election. And if you elect someone, that means like you voted or you chose someone. Well, John Calvin believed that God chose certain people before there ever was a world made, before anyone was born, before the sun, before the universe was made. John Calvin believed that God elected some people to go to heaven and some people to go to hell. So before creation occurred, some people were damned. In other words, some people were going to be going to hell no matter what happens in their life. That God made you with a specific purpose of going to hell. And just like God elected or chose some people to go to hell, God elected or chose some people to go to heaven. Ultimately, the thing about this point of view is that it stresses who's in charge, who's the person that makes these decisions. It's not you, it's God. And this really stresses the fact that God is an all-powerful God, because the questions of heaven and hell has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with what God elected before the creation of the world. With that in mind, they also believed in L, limited atonement. When they talked about Jesus dying on the cross for sins, they believed that Jesus only died on the cross for the elect. Limited atonement means that Jesus' death only applies to the elect. Let's say, for instance, that Jesus, before God made the world, he decided Mr. Lucone was elected to go to hell. That means in this Calvinistic thinking, when Jesus dies on the cross, he did not die for Mr. Lucone's sins. Mr. Lucone's going to go to hell. It doesn't matter what I would desire or that I want to escape hell. There's nothing I can do. This decision's been made for me. And it's been made for me so much so that Jesus didn't even die for me on the cross. He may have died for you, but he did not die for me. His death does not atone for my sins. The I in TULIP is irresistible grace. And you can write down there's nothing you can do to reject God if you were elected. If you were elected, there's nothing you can do to resist God. What that means is if someone was chosen to be saved or chosen to become a Christian, it's irresistible. That you do not have the freedom of will to decide, I'm going to reject Jesus. I'm going to reject God. They believe that it's irresistible. And in the same way, if you were to not be chosen by God, there's nothing you can do to change what God has decided will be true of you. It's irresistible. No changes can be made. Finally, the P in TULIP is perseverance of the saints. And that basically means, how do you know who's a true Christian and who's a false Christian? Probably everyone knows someone that they grew up going to church with, or someone that they read that was a Christian at some part of their life and then walked away from the faith. How do you deal with that? What's the cause or the reason for that? Well, John Calvin would say, if someone doesn't persevere in the faith, if someone doesn't endure to the end, if they, walk away from Christianity, then that's evidence that they probably were never truly a Christian. Because if you're a real Christian, you'll persevere in the faith until the end. That you'll always believe in God, always believe in Jesus. It's impossible, remember, for you to walk away. Now, all of these things in TULIP are all kind of wrapped around this idea of predestination. Predestination is the belief that your future has been determined for you before you were ever born. Predestination is the idea that your future was determined for you before you were ever born, and there's nothing you can do about it. God is the one who's decided who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. He's predestined. He's created this world with a specific purpose in mind, and nothing will hinder his plan from coming to fruition. These basic ideas are called Calvinism, and they are very common in Protestant Christianity. Probably about 40% of Southern Baptist churches in the United States have pastors who are Calvinist. Calvinists represent some of the most popular authors in Christianity today. The president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, one of the largest seminaries in the United States, is a Calvinist. This is very common, acceptable views in Christianity. That being said, not everyone agrees with Calvinism, including another school of thought called Arminianism. Arminianism is the belief that we as humans have free will, and that God, that even though we are all sinners and we're depraved, but we're not so depraved that we can't make a choice for God. And if Calvinists say that Jesus died only for the elect, Arminians say that Jesus died for everybody. And even though Jesus died for everyone, it's up to you to decide. It'd be like if I came to class and I came with $20 gift cards to Chick-fil-A, and I said, I have in my hand $20 gift cards to Chick-fil-A. Anyone who wants it, come and take it out of my hand. Well, that's your choice to take it out of my hand. I paid so that everyone could have Chick-fil-A. If someone chose not to get it, it's not because I was a jerk and didn't pay for it. It's not that I was a jerk and I didn't provide it. It's because you chose not to take it. And that's what Arminians believe about heaven. They believe that Jesus died to atone for the sins of every man, woman, and child. But if you don't take advantage of that atonement, if you don't take the payment, if you don't take what he's offering, that's not on him, that's on you. And while the Calvinists said that this grace of God is irresistible, Arminians say, oh, you can resist God. You can resist God every day of your life to the very end. You can tell God no, and you can decide nothing to do with him. This idea, where you have the freedom to choose, where heaven and hell is up to you, not up to God having chosen it before you're born, is popularly called Arminianism. Now let's go to the Counter-Reformation or the Catholic Reformation. Either way, it's referring to the same thing. So we have the Protestant Reformation where they're challenging and protesting some important things. Well, the Catholic Church realizes people are falling into this belief system, people are leaving the church. We have to do something to make some corrections to some of the things we've taught. And their response to these, some of them legitimate issues, is called the Counter Reformation or the Catholic Reformation. Either way, it's the same thing. And there's going to be three parts of the Reformation: Jesuits, a Reformed papacy, and the Council of Trent. Those three are just like an outline of what we're about to do. No reason to write anything about those three at this time. Let's go to the handout where it says the Society of Jesus. The Society of Jesus. Well, we'll write down where it says Ignatius Loyola. He was the founder of the Jesuits. The Jesuits have a nickname, is a nickname for a group called the Society of Jesus. And Ignatius Loyola is the one who goes ahead and starts. He founds and he begins this order. It's a group of Catholic priests called the Jesuits. And we want to also write down on the handout that they stressed absolute loyalty to the church. Absolute loyalty to the church. And even if that meant going against your own insight, Loyola believed that so much that he tried to lived it out in the decisions that he made. In fact, he once said, and this is on your handout, if we wish to proceed securely in all things, we must hold fast to the principle that what seems to me to be white, I will believe to be black, if the church so defines. In other words, he says, even if like common sense would say, I'm holding a white piece of paper right now, if the Catholic Church says, no, 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 that's a black piece of paper, he says, I'll believe it. Whatever the Catholic Church says is true. We have to have someone that we can trust. We can have to have someone we can rely on, and that someone is the Catholic Church. Now, on your handout on the back side, the Jesuits had a strong focus on education. In fact, to this day, Jesuits exist, and if you ever meet a Jesuit, you're going to meet one of the most educated Catholic priests you can ever meet. It's very common for Jesuits to have doctorates, to have a PhD. There's even a joke among Jesuits that you can know who is like the failure Jesuit if you ever meet a Jesuit that only has one PhD. Because there are Jesuits that have two doctorates. They often will have like a doctorate in theology or like the Bible, and they'll have a doctorate in physics or in astronomy. This happens not in a common way. On the handout, or on the slide rather, they build over 74 colleges on 3 different continents. If you look at some of like the best universities in the United States today, these are Jesuit colleges. Think about the University of Notre Dame, Jesuit university. If you think about Loyola, Jesuit university. If you think about Georgetown in Washington, D.C., one of the finest universities we have in the U.S., these are all Jesuit schools. And they build these colleges all over the world because they want to train Catholics to have a reasoned defense against the Protestants. They also, in the handout, were officially recognized in 1540 by Pope Paul III, where the Pope says this is a good thing. The part of the problem with the Protestants is the Protestants have all these arguments that we need to have trained responses to. And by having these universities, we can actually train Catholics to have reasonable responses. Also, on the handout, we see that they had personal loyalty to the Pope, that they took their role as being loyal to the Pope incredibly seriously. And because of these well-educated priests that have reasoned, intelligent responses to the things the Protestants were saying, they helped restore Catholicism in Europe and abroad. These are some of the advantages that the Society of Jesus or the Jesuits have. And here's an image of, some typical Jesuit institutions, schools, and whatnot that are built around the country. What about a Reformed papacy? Well, the papacy realizes that, yeah, they've made some mistakes. In fact, they acknowledge some of the corruption of Renaissance popes. Remember, we had said that back in the Renaissance, there were some popes that had, very open affairs, or they very clearly used prostitutes, or they bought certain people offices in the church. And so one of the things the Counter-Reformation did is they recognized we need to really take care of some of these issues. We need to make sure that we have reforms where we have good popes making godly decisions. Also, they realized that maybe in the past we got too involved with politics and military affairs of the world. Maybe we should focus a little bit more on spiritual things and not be getting involved in certain government's business. And finally, Pope Paul III even put together a reform commission to make recommendations of things that they could change. Ultimately, one of the things they decide to do is that they need to have a meeting and figure out what are the essentials that we need to stick to and what are the things that we can really afford to let go of. This meeting is going to manifest in what we call the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent is going to be a massive meeting over several years where all the bishops from all around the Catholic world will gather to talk, to listen, to debate, and then figure out what are the essentials of the Catholic faith. What are the things you must believe to be Catholic? What is true, and what are things that Protestants are just wrong in? In 1545, a general council was called to sort out Catholic belief. In 1545, a general council was called to sort out Catholic belief. And what they wanted to do as they sorted out Catholic belief is clarify doctrine. Remember that word doctrine means beliefs, and they wanted to really make it clear because the Protestants are muddying the waters. They want to clarify so that that everyone knows what is it that the Protestants are saying that's right, and most importantly, what are the Protestants saying that's wrong? One of the big things the Council of Trent decides is about faith and works. And they say faith plus works are necessary for salvation, that you cannot go to heaven without good works. It's great if you believe in Jesus. It's great that you think he died on the cross and rose from the dead. But apart from doing certain things, you cannot get salvation. And remember, that is a rejection of what the Protestants say. The Protestants say solo fide. They say salvation is by faith alone. And the Catholic Church says that's not true. It's by faith and doing good things. Also, they say that the belief in transubstantiation is an essential Catholic belief. You must believe in transubstantiation in order to be in good standing with the Catholic Church. They're not going to let that go. In addition, they say indulgences are okay, but you can't buy them. For instance, you can't buy pieces of paper anymore that lets grandma get out of purgatory, but you could visit like a certain shrine or the burial place of a saint and maybe like go on a trip there and pray. And that could still earn time off of purgatory, but they're going to say we can't buy it anymore. And finally, they say that as far as Bibles are concerned, the Vulgate, or the Latin translation of the Bible, are the only acceptable translations to use. So Luther's Bible, unacceptable. Wycliffe's English Bible, unacceptable. Only the Latin version is the only one that Catholics can use, the Vulgate, even if it's a Bible that you can't read. Speaking of reading, the Catholic Church also puts together something called the Index of Forbidden Books. This is put together by Pope Paul IV in 1557, and actually they print a list every single year all the way until 1948 of books that Catholics are not supposed to read. This list of 4,000 books that if you're a Catholic you're not supposed to read include the works of Francis Bacon, Copernicus, John Calvin, Galileo, John Locke, Martin Luther, Hobbes, Bible versions, and Machiavelli. And here it is, the actual official symbol of the Index of Forbidden Books published. And you could go pick up your copy all the way up until World War II and find out what books, as a Catholic, that you would not be allowed to read. The thing about books is they're incredibly dangerous. They're incredibly infectious with their ideas. And by reading the wrong books, you could walk away with the wrong ideas. So 4,000 titles of books all the way to 1948 that you, as a Catholic, would not be allowed to read. Now, with all this disagreement that leads unfortunately into actual open conflict in 1562 to 1598, you can write down there was war between Protestants and Catholics. And war does occur for many different reasons, including religion. There was a group of French that we need to discuss, a group of people called the Huguenots. And the Huguenots was a word for French Calvinists. The Huguenots were French Calvinists, and On the handout, where it says the Bourbons, they represented 40 to 50% of the nobility, and the family of note in France was the Bourbon family, and up to half of the nobility sided with the French Calvinists, these Huguenots. But only 7% of the French population was actually Calvinist or a Huguenot. Most of French society was Catholic. So the tensions between the Catholics on one side and the Protestants on the other led to open civil war in France. The towns that resisted the power of the Catholic king would be towns that would be punished, and the Huguenots, as we had said, had definitely the support of some in the nobility, and then people have to kind of figure out what is the most important thing, keeping France together or standing by what I believe to be religiously true. And this is a decision that some of the leaders decide, listen, is it worth staying Protestant knowing that it's just going to continue warfare in France? Henry is going to have to make that decision. Now, even though Henry, on your handout, was a Calvinist, he was a Huguenot, he decides to become Catholic, not because of deep-seated religious reasons, but because he believes, and he's right, that if he just converts to the Catholic faith, which is what the majority of people believe, he can help end the conflict in front of him. He does. And a cool thing about this is you have this religious edict or ruling, and the edict of 1598 that he passes is going to be a really great step forward. This edict, which is demonstrated right here, is going to say that Calvinists, even though they're the minority, have the freedom of conscience to make a decision. They do not have to be Catholic, and if they are Calvinist, they'll actually get religious protections. This edict is so important in creating an open and pluralistic society where different choices can be made without the risk of being arrested or interrogated or tortured. The edict allows for a society of different and competing Christian claims to be made without fear.